So it's fair to say Cataclysm Classic has been raging on the past 5 months or so, and with the Molten Front now in full swing as we say goodbye to Tier 11. In preparation for Firelands, the progression of Cataclysm is getting ready for its next big step, and with Firelands always being highlighted as likely the best part of Cata as a whole for the expansion, with a raid that lives on pretty favourably when looking back at World of Warcraft as a whole. However, as we press throughout the year and based upon the original timeline for Cata, we won't have too long left of the expansion potentially, as we were due to head into Dragon Soul, the final big raid of the expansion around the start of 2025, with further questions being asked like where do we go with Classic next as the player base asks for fresh servers, the original trilogy, all alongside requests for Classic Plus, and still maybe Mists of Pandaria, so it's even worth putting your time into Cata Classic for the next few months. Let's take a look. So straight out the bat, I'd argue if you have any curiosity about wanting to try Cata Classic or even just wanting to relive some of the old content, it's absolutely worth diving in for. Despite Cata causing a few issues with the player base and dividing fans once again over what or what isn't classic, the truth is that Cataclysm is still a pretty good expansion in its own right. And to be honest, I enjoyed my time in it for Tier 11, even if that did feel pretty short-lived after clearing all the content. As well as for me, Cataclysm doesn't have the same repeatability in terms of long-term raiding or making a lot of alts. In the same way in which I feel about Retail WoW or Vanilla throughout the trilogy, it is fun enough to take up a few weeks or months of playtime in WoW, and that's pretty much how I treated it, as I think the change to the old world was interesting to relive and seeing how certain things came to life once again, like flying throughout the entire world, or experiencing some of the great questing that Cata has to offer, and once again Tier 11 is a great set of raids to run through, and I genuinely mean that. So if it's still something to tick off your list, I'd say go for it. Firelands is a great raid to run and the existing content is still great fun. There's also what feels like a pretty strong core base of players that I'll love in Cataclysm. I mean, there's so much availability in terms of guilds and pugs, even when I pop back on my server to see what's going on. It's nice to know that there's a lot of people who are keeping going and appreciating what they have. So for lack of a better understanding, don't be worried about visiting an absolute ghost town, as there's still plenty of players submitting their time to Cataclysm. However, for me, I'm definitely off the hype train and probably was a few months ago, and I doubt I'll even come back for Firelands, mostly to do with the long-term potential issues of even bothering to committing for Cataclysm. For starters, we're really not sure where we're heading for the long term of Classic WoW in general, and the truth is if we got era servers for BC, Wrath or Fresh for Vanilla, or even advertising a new Classic Plus, you can bet your lucky stars I wouldn't be bothered about revisiting Cataclysm. And further to this, although I enjoyed the original run of Mists of Pandaria, and would maybe come back to see the start of Mists and for a few raid patches, it doesn't fill me with the excitement for the same way from going from Vanilla to BC to Wrath did. In retrospect, for a lot of players, it did feel like they were happy enough with Vanilla, but it also felt like BC would come, and the same with BC to Wrath. It always felt like that natural progression would happen, and that extension hasn't quite been the same for Cataclysm, and I'm not sure the pullback for a long-term progression of Cata to Mists to what, Warlords of Draenor? And if that progression continues, I'll probably do a little bit of Mists and maybe come back for Legion, and that's a big if. But then we can actually chat about what we know is coming, and that thing is Dragon Soul. Now Dragon Soul gets a pretty bad rep for being a fairly bad last raid, and well, parts of it are actually pretty fun, but it's certain that the end encounter doesn't really feel satisfying for the whole expansion, and it's especially not a draw in when things like Retail WoW are pretty great at the moment. And I can't see myself wanting to go through Firelands and gearing up knowing that the end delicious treat I get is not delicious, it's in fact sour. It comes in the form of clipping Deathwing's toenails. I think for me Tier 11 and the freshness of Cata with all the change in hype was big enough to pull me back in, and maybe a bit of a tease that I might carry through to Firelands, and there was much fun to be had, yet I had no interest in levelling alts for a change, which is odd, as I love levelling a good old alt, but Cataclysm doesn't have that repeatability appeal for me, and really there isn't enough content despite how great Firelands is to make me come back and commit so much time to Cata, knowing that the last phase is well gonna be a bit of a stinker. Pile that on with Mists of Pandaria being okay but not really something that blasts my mind. You could argue that going back to Cata with any idea of it being a fun long-term commitment is actually pretty pointless, when there's other good options out there like Vanilla Era or Retail or even Season of Discovery if that tickles your fancy. Or hey, who knows, Blizzard might just turn around and decide they're not re-releasing any more old expansions, and what happens then? I think it's likely we will get Mists of Pandaria, but nothing's promised, especially not if a Classic Plus starts taking up all their time and investment. I honestly think the majority of Classic players would rather have a good Classic Plus in development and era servers for the original trilogy, and we saw this again with the exodus of players that happened when Cata was announced, and tie that in with projects like Mop Remix kind of providing a weird middle ground for players who wanted Mists. I think when you look at Cata now for the general appeal of where you're going overall long term, you know that Firelands is going to peak in the next few months, and that Dragon Soul certainly won't be as good, but then you might get Mists of Pandaria, which might be a bit of hype, but you don't know. So it might not be to your tastes, and even Mists might not take you in. However, I really do think that Cataclysm still has a lot of good fun to offer for the raiding content between tier 11 and 12, and Dragon Soul is probably worth running a couple of times, and those new dungeons I did really like. The existing dungeons are still great, leveling is still great, and the class reworks, well, they work and they're pretty fun for what it's worth. So I think it's worth playing Cataclysm likely heading into it, purely knowing that you'll get some fun out of it, but you have to take it with a pinch of salt when it comes to progression or even wanting to find players that will stick around with you for the long term. Sometimes enjoying the moment of something is all you really need, and I think that's how I viewed Cata since its release and how I felt since I left playing it. I thoroughly enjoyed my time there, but once I was done with all the raiding I wanted to, I was happy to drop it without feeling like I wasted my time. So hey, go for it. I think there's still lots of good things in there. Just keep your wits about you. But let me know, are you still playing Cata and how it's going for you? And are you looking forward to Firelands? Yet as always, take care out there, and I'll see you on the next one. Ta-ra for now. As always, if you're new here, feel free to like and subscribe. And on that note, I think I'll say ta-ra for now, and I'll see you later.